So an easy one with the trap, these upper fibers. Remember, they can pull the head and neck this way. So what I'm gonna do for a pin and stretch is I'm gonna have him move in a direction opposite to that, because that's gonna force that tissue, this tissue, to lengthen. Most of the time with massage therapy, we're dealing with tissue that is non-compliant, right? We can feel this. When you grab someone's trap, if it's a little dense, it's a little hard. If it's non-compliant to my pressure, it's probably not very compliant to movement in general. You following me? Right? This can be trigger points, this can be densification, right? What you have though is tissue that is non-compliant. It don't want to move. It don't want to move under my pressure. It's probably not going to move very well under his movement. So what my goal is to make that tissue more compliant. I'm going to do that through warming it, right? Making it warmer, changing the fluid dynamics. I'm going to do that through mobilizing the tissue while I tack down the portions that are not compliant. So I'm localizing the force into the tissue. Yes, ma'am?
Is non-compliant and tension the same thing, or is that something different?
Tension would be a form of non-compliance. But you can have other things in tissue like fascial densification, in which the fascia has changed a little bit and it makes it feel more dense. And that's not quite the same thing as tension.
Gotcha. So you really have to practice to learn to feel it. Because in my brain, if I touch something, I'm like, oh, it's hard. That means it's like it's tense, it needs to be loosened, but that doesn't necessarily mean that.
There's also different kinds of tension.
Like his hamstrings.
There's different kinds of tension too. So there's like mechanical tension, which is the properties of the tissue itself, which, to give you an example, if I'm dealing with like a runner is going to have really taut IT bands because that's a mechanical adaptation of the IT band to the act of running, the stress of running. Does that make sense? They're probably also going to have really restricted lateral hip musculature on this side because of the use of that. So that's a change in the mechanical properties of the tissue. But you can also have neurological tone, which is similar to like spasming or guarding, where it's not necessarily a change in the quality of the tissue, it's a change in the nerve impulse to the tissue that's causing the contraction. Most of the change that we make in the short term is changes to neurological tension. It's not as widely accepted that we make any changes to mechanical tension. That makes sense? We can make changes to, no. In essence, we can't change the mechanical properties of the tissue.
Okay.
I can't break the tissue.
Right.
Despite what you might have been told, I cannot break scar tissue. If I did, it would be wickedly painful, right? Yeah. So, and I also cannot, as a human, produce enough force with my body to create that kind of change in most tissue. The vast majority of fascial tissue is too strong for me to try to actually like break it or rip it or quote unquote release it, anything like that. Instead, the changes I'm making are more likely neurological. I'm causing the tissue to relax and calm down. I might be making some changes to the densification, which is more of the fluid changes to fascia. Because remember, fascia is not just fibers, it's also fluid in that. You have an extracellular matrix, which has water, it has glycoproteins, things like hyaluronin or hyaluronic acid. My estheticians, you should know that what that is. People who care about their skin, hyaluronic acid's in everything because it hangs onto water. When hyaluronic acid hangs onto water, it creates a better lubricant, right? So when fascia becomes densified, there's changes to the lubrication. There's changes to the fluid dynamics of that fascia. Does that make sense? You change that with massage. When you massage something for a little while, it does generally get a little bit softer. Part of that's the tension, the neurological tension he's releasing, but part of that's also the warming and the change in the fluid dynamics. Does that make sense? I went on a little tangent there. Pretty normal. Anyways, back to our soft tissue mobilizations. The goal is to make the tissue more compliant. So if I have a pretty dense upper trap right here, which most people do, I can use a soft tissue mobilization. All I'm going to do is I'm going to pin it down, put some pressure in it, in the area where it feels the most non-compliant, and then I'm going to have a move in a way that lengthens that tissue underneath it. Now, even though we call them pin and stretches, you're not always moving into a deep stretch. So the person may not always feel like a deep stretch. They're just going to feel a little bit of like, oh, that's weird. You know what I'm saying? So don't think that you're always moving them into a deep stretch. You're just moving in a way that lengthens the tissue. So we can do a thumb. I can tack that trap down and then have him take his right ear to his right shoulder, nice and slow. Good, and then reset. Maybe I move a little bit closer to one of the attachments, same thing. And you see it's getting a little bit more difficult because I'm grabbing onto a tissue that has to move, but because I'm applying, oh yeah, crunchy. Because I'm applying a little bit of force to it, it doesn't want to move. So now in this area, I can feel that levator kind of rolling around. Go ahead. Good, reset. Now go ahead, go chin to chest. So as I get back here, see this wants to lengthen out now. So I'm just going to change the direction, but it's still the same. The tissue is lengthening under my compression. Go ahead. What I like about soft tissue mobilizations is that they're incorporating movement from the client, and that's going to be more applicable to when they move. I can do things passively, and when they get up, they'll feel better. But if I can, in a session, in a few little techniques, improve their range of motion because I'm directly targeting the tissue that's limiting that range of motion, that client's going to be happier about it. And they're going to see it and they're going to feel it. They're going to be like, oh, wow, yeah, I feel that like loosening up. And you'll notice with each repetition, they go a little further. They get a little further into it because they're reducing some of that tension and you're making that tissue slide and glide better, making it more compliant. Okay, so that's the trap. You can also do that for levator, right? Now, obviously, the trap is on top. So in principles of deep tissue, you work the superficial layer, and then you go one layer deeper. So with levator, what I might have him do is I'm going to think about now the transverse process rather than his head. So what I like to have people do when I hit levator is to have them rotate and then go down like they're going to put their chin in their armpit. And that's going to cause this line of tension to stretch out more, right? So I'm going to get right on top of that levator. Now I want you to put, your chin, yeah, there you go, in your right armpit. And then reset. Maybe I move up. Go ahead. Good. Reset. Move a little closer. I'm putting force directly into the tissue. So I'm putting pressure into the area that's non-compliant. Because here's the thing. So when a tissue is like non-compliant, I want you to think of it as like a knot in a rubber band. So there's a knot in that rubber band. It's not literally a knot in the tissue, but it's an area that's not going to comply with movement. When I stretch that rubber band, everything around that knot's going to stretch, but not that particular knot. Does that make sense? So what I can do is I can come in and I can put pressure right on that knot and then lengthen. And what I'm doing is forcing that particular area to comply more. I'm directly putting force into a specific area that didn't want to transmit force before. Does that make sense?